Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started. Sorry, hold on, we're having a little bit of a delay, it looks like. Okay. Okay, so I am Caitlin Pryor. I was a staff attorney and training supervisor at Day One for about 3.5 years, and I've been working with young people for nearly 15 years. Today, we're going to be talking about understanding tech abuse among young people, and this is the second part in our three-part webinar series. So a little bit about Day One. Day One is the only organization in New York State that devotes all of its resources to ending dating abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, and the domestic sex trafficking of young people. And we do so in what I think is a pretty comprehensive way. So we provide not only trainings and webinars like you're hearing here today, but we provide supportive services, including social and legal services to young people who are ages 24 and under, identify as survivors, and live in New York City. We also engage in prevention, talking to everyone from elementary age children up to college age young people about healthy relationships, consent, tech abuse. We're available to strategize, so technical assistance. If issues come up at your workplace and you want a game plan together, please reach out. We invest in youth leadership development through our Youth Voices Network, which is a group of folks who experienced dating abuse as young people and are now activists lending their voice to this movement. We're going to hear from one of those Youth Voices Network members today during our training. We also provide materials for professionals as well as young people. And you can request any of our materials or our services through our website, which will be at the end of this training. So make sure to write that down, although you will be receiving a recording, so you don't necessarily need to write it down. You can always view it again later. So a little bit of housekeeping. Folks who have been with us for the September trainings know the deal, and even folks who joined us for the first part last week. This is our second webinar in a third-part series. Our third webinar will be next Wednesday. And after that webinar, folks who are looking for their CEU credits will receive them from NOAA. You will receive a feedback form as well as a registration form for the third webinar by email tomorrow from NOAA. You'll receive a recording of this webinar Friday. If you can't hear anything or can't see something, please make sure you note that in the chat box so we can adjust it accordingly. You will need to register for each webinar individually, so just because you register for today doesn't mean you've registered for next week's. So make sure you do so. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat box, and we will be sure to get to them at the end of the webinar, but you're welcome to please post them throughout this training as they come up for you. Any questions, please reach out to NOAA. NOAA's contact information is here, and their information will also be at the end of this webinar. All right, folks. So today we're building off what we learned about last week. We're going to discuss how information is shared through tech. We're going to talk about how can we control what's shared if we want to. We're going to talk about tech positive safety planning. You're going to hear that from me a lot. We're going to consider how we're screening for tech abuse and how we would engage in an actual tech screening interview. So I'm going to give you some ideas for questions about what information you might be wanting to glean from the young person that's sitting before you. So a little bit of a recap for folks who weren't here last week or maybe are like me and can't remember what they talked about last week. So a reminder, young people are growing up with and through technology. We talked about last week how I think it was 95% of young people have smartphones or have access to smartphones. So if we're working with young people and we're not thinking about tech, then we're missing a big part of their lives. We know that they're using tech for a range of reasons. A lot of it is super positive and is necessary. So they're getting information through technology, finding friendship, love, community. And we know that identity impacts how tech is used by young people, right? We talked a lot about LGBTQ young people and how income levels can affect your kind of tech use. And it can also impact the importance of tech in your life, right? If you're someone who doesn't find folks who are like them in their community, you might be able to find that community online. So we're thinking about tech from that positive perspective. But we're also unfortunately reminded that it can be used to abuse, right? However, I do not want folks going down the rabbit hole thinking everything is complex and worthy of like a CSI episode, right? Most things are going to be simple. They're age-old tactics of abuse. They're just happening through technology. So when we think of tech abuse, we're not thinking complex. We're reminding ourselves that tech has deep impact, right? That the person before us is impacted by this. And we're not just pushing them to go off the grid, right? That's why we're talking today, so we can have some more realistic opportunities or options for young people other than like, hey, just change your phone number and don't go on any social media ever again. Big Brother is watching, right? So we're going to talk today about how can we actually support them to be safer in the ways they wish to be online. Okay, so we're going to move into talking about safety planning. And within safety planning, we're going to talk about tech screening. So what is a safety plan? For folks who joined us for the September webinars, we talked in depth about what a safety plan is. We didn't focus on tech. We did talk about generally what it is and what we're looking to do. So generally, we're trying to assess, okay, what's the level of risk? How do we reduce this risk in ways that are realistic and in line with what the survivor wants to do? What is the survivor doing already that's helping to increase their safety, right? We're not just focusing on the negative. We're reminding ourselves when we're safety planning that it doesn't mean that that person is leaving their partner, right? They could be in a current relationship with someone who's harming them. And we're not offering ultimatums when we're working with them, right? So safety, we're thinking about generally as a whole in all the areas that young people exist and live, right? So community, home, if they're going to court, work, school. And today we're going to focus online. However, online certainly intersects with those arenas, right? So online might intersect with work. And so we're still thinking about those arenas, but I just want to be focusing on online so we can provide some additional skills to safety plan around tech. So that's what a safety plan is. I want folks to take a moment and I want you to either write down or have in your head your favorite form of tech. Maybe you use it like a couple times a day, and maybe like if it was full disclosure, you use it about like 10, 20 times a day. No shame over here. So think about your favorite form of tech. And feel free if you want to, you can share it in the chat box. You don't have to. But picture that tech, right? Okay. So I know for me, it's text. That is like my favorite form of tech because I despise phone calls for some reason. I just saw someone concur with me. Okay, so now think about what would happen if I took away that tech from you. If I was like, hey, so I know you use this on the reg, but you can't use it from this day forward. Like this is not an option for you. You're gonna have to figure out other alternatives. So I'm sure some of you out there are like, yes, thank you. I do not have to be readily available. I definitely feel moments of that as well. But now, mind you, you still have the other forms of tech available to you. So the phone calls might happen if you're into the text like I am, and that was taken away. So how does it feel to have that favorite form of tech taken away? I'm seeing some meltdowns on the chat box. I'm sorry to those. I'm sure for some it's relief, right? Some peace. How would you feel towards me if I was a person being like, hey, so no more. You just can't use it. Like, sorry, not sorry. What would you lose if you had this tech gone from you? What might change in your life? What adjustments would you have to do? And how would other people respond to those changes in your life? Right? And so I can speak for myself. I'm seeing some angry, breakdown, devastated. I know for me, if I didn't have the option of text, sure, WhatsApp counts as text. It can be a social media app, it can be email, it can be a banking app, it can be whatever works for you, it can be your Kindle, right? So whatever form of tech you're thinking of. I know if I were to have text taken away from me, I probably would not be very good at maintaining relationships. I'm not great at it now, um, but if I had to make phone calls or do something that required a little more effort and thought and felt a little more vulnerable, I'm not sure I would reach out to folks, right? I wouldn't know what was going on with folks. I would probably be more isolated. I'd be less likely to ask for support from folks. And I would not feel so good about the person who told me, like, hey, you're not using that anymore. And I know for a lot of folks, like, we're expected to use tech. Like, if I were to tell an employer, like, so I don't use email, and how they would respond to me, they'd be like, oh, that's not going to work for us, right? Like, tech is integrated into our lives. And so I really want you to be thinking of these feelings that you had as we were talking through losing this tech. When we're thinking about safety planning with young people, and when our tendency when we feel overwhelmed or don't know what the problem is to just be like, well, just don't use it, right? Or when we're afraid, that often tends to be the tactic that we use, right? So we're carrying this feeling with us as I deprive you of this sad tech. I will magically provide it back to you at the end of this training. And so a reminder that we're thinking positively about tech, right? Tech positivity. We saw that tech provides a lot of support and options for us. The idea of taking it away can be very problematic for folks. And we're thinking about how we actually use it oftentimes for safety. So it might be used for harm, but it can also be used a lot for safety. And to take it away might actually decrease safety. So let's take a moment. Let's hear from a survivor, the Youth Voices Network member that I spoke of. And
I remember every day he'll message me before I went to class because he knew my class schedule, and he'll say, like, I'm outside your house, like, I'm waiting for you, where are you, like, let me take you to school, I'll drive you to school, I'm outside, open the door, I'm gonna knock on your door. And I remember every morning I would just, like, look through the peephole and try to see if I saw him there, and I would be so scared to, like, leave my house and go to work because I thought he would follow me, and sometimes he did. And so that's when I had to, like, learn a new route or, like, walk different ways every day to the train station because I was like, he knows my routine, and so obviously he's gonna know, like, where he can find me and how he can catch me. And so he would just never leave me alone, and he would constantly message me or call me, and it came to a point where I didn't even want to look at my phone. Like, it was just like every time I looked at my phone, it was like so many messages from him, so many calls from him saying, like, pick up, where are you, I'm gonna go to your house, like, answer me. And I didn't know what to do. Like, at that point I just felt like I lost, like I was never able to be just sit alone in peace and not be in fear and not be scared. I lost my peace.
so some things I heard from the YVN member. Of course, we heard about impact, right? We talked about impact during our last webinar. That feeling that she just had no peace, that there was this constant, incessant thing out of her control that continued to happen. And how often we rely on our phone for everything, right? And to not be able to find peace in this thing that she had to look to for so many aspects of her life seemed overwhelming. You can see it what I talked about before about how tech intersects with real life. So you see the intersection of tech and being in her community, and how when he would text, she would change her routine, right? She might wait. She might look outside to see if he was there. And so how that kind of changed how she went about moving about her community, getting to school. It also, I think, highlights that she was safety planning on her own. So one thing I do want you to keep in mind is that it's likely that the person who comes to see you or speaks to you about their tech abuse is already engaged in safety planning. So you're really there to support them. and to really boost them up and encourage them to do the things that they've been doing already to keep themselves safe. So I think that that was really highlighted in what she was talking about. She was already thinking about, we have this relationship. He knows my routines, so I had to change those routines. And relying on that contact to inform those changes and that safety plan. So you can see there that ongoing nature of a safety plan as well. And so I think it's really important. We're going to carry those feelings in mind. We're going to hear from her again later on. But just keeping in mind that impact, the way that tech was used to increase her safety, and also the changes that happened as a result of information gained through tech, is really important to keep in mind as we move forward. Okay. So in addition to thinking about what we just talked about, I want folks to be considering legal paths as part of a safety plan if the survivor wants that, and only as a complement. It should not supplement the safety plan. So you should not just have a legal path and that is all. You should have a legal path plus a safety plan. And oftentimes legal paths increase areas of risk, right? And so we're just going to brush on this very briefly so you're keeping in mind when you're safety planning. We're not going to go over the laws around this in detail. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the laws next time when we talk about non-consensual pornography. But if you're looking for more information on young people's rights, I encourage you to watch the webinars from September, and they talk more in detail about young people and how that kind of interacts with the law. So considering legal options, when you are experiencing tech abuse, there are a couple different paths you can take, and you can take those paths concurrently. So you don't have to take only one or only two. You can be seeking support from multiple systems. However, we're keeping in mind how young people are often treated by systems and the fact that tech abuse impact is often not really, people don't provide much empathy around that. So we're preparing folks for that as well, right? It was just through tech, right? It's not physical, it's not a bruise, it's not a punch. And we're reminding them about the impact of tech abuse. So one of the paths you can take if someone is experiencing tech abuse is they could go to family court saying that this person engaged in tech abuse against them and they want an order of protection or an order telling the other person to not engage in certain behaviors. And so that can include things like tagging someone or posting naked pictures of that person, right? It can kind of be flexible based on what the tech abuse is. So that's one of the paths. Another path is you can go to the police. And if the police find that a crime happened, then a criminal case can begin and an order of protection can happen that way. And so that's another option that can happen concurrently with family court. If you're in school and that school receives federal funding, then that school has a duty to prevent and address dating abuse, tech abuse when it happens. And so you can reach out to the school to try to seek some accommodations if the tech abuse is in any way interfering with their education, or get things like a no contact directive, which is basically like an order of protection, right? Ordering someone to do something or other, but it's not going to be enforceable by the police. So that's another option. And then the fourth area that we see folks going around tech abuse is around civil remedies. A civil claim that gets complicated, I'm not going to go into detail about that. It tends to be when folks have money, they're able to seek out a civil claim, right? Saying like someone defamed me or caused me emotional distress. But what we see most often is someone saying, hey, I have copyright over that, right? I own that picture and you posted that picture. And so using that way of civil law to try to take things down or to address tech abuse when it happens. I'm not going into detail, like I said. If you have additional questions around like legal options, you can of course reach out to Day One. And like I said before, I encourage you to watch the prior webinars on young people and the law. But when we're thinking about legal options, really why I'm bringing it up is because I want you, regardless of whether the person before you right now is thinking about legal options, it's still important to be thinking about evidence. Evidence doesn't have to do with being a lawyer. Anyone can collect evidence. Support a young person to collect evidence, because the thing about tech evidence is once it's gone, right? It's not coming back for the most part. Sometimes law enforcement can get things that were deleted or in the past, but for the most part, for those of us from like nonprofits and the such, we're not getting that evidence back. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to support what the survivor is saying. So what do I mean by that? So if the survivor is saying, my partner calls me 20 times a day, then I'm going to take a screenshot of that call log showing that the partner calls 20 times a day, right? Because it's supporting what the survivor is saying. We're doing it all the time because it's happening all the time. We should be asking the survivor to do the actual screenshot and collection. I'm not going to go into, there's legal reasons for that. Just know that it shouldn't be you, the service provider, taking the screenshot. It should be the young person taking the screenshot. You can hold the screenshots, right? You can hold the evidence for them. And a lot of times I've done that for clients because they don't want it anymore, right? They want to take the screenshot, they want to delete it, and they want to be done with it. And that's totally cool. And I get that. The goal is to have as much identifying information as you can, but if you don't have it, again, it doesn't have to be perfect. So what do I mean by that? So like the actual phone number, right? The date, the time, if it's an email, the IP address, right? As much information so that it can't be said that like, no, I didn't send that, or I sent this on this date instead. If it's an email, we want the original email. We don't want the forwarded. If it's already deleted, have a survivor write it down. It's not perfect, but it is evidence, and it still supports what they're saying. I really encourage folks to have an evidence log, and so by that I mean like a journal that says, on this date, my mom texted me and told me to meet them at the park. When I met them at the park, my partner was there, right? So not only am I then going to remember what happened, right, because it's written down, but also I'm going to be able to use that to start to connect the dots. Right? If the partner is showing up everywhere I text my mom, then I'm going to start being like, why? Right? What form of tech abuse might be happening? One party consent rule. In New York, if you're part of a conversation, you can record that conversation. So that's evidence. Don't get bogged down trying to be like, this person was behind this computer at this time. I have found that oftentimes when talking to the police, they care about that, but that actually doesn't matter when it comes to evidence. You don't have to prove that, right? Again, we're supporting a conclusion. It doesn't have to be perfect, okay? So we're thinking about evidence, even if the person is like adamant, I don't want to go to court. If they change their mind, it's gone. So we're helping them think about evidence and supporting them to collect that evidence, right? And I'm sure working with young people, they know how to take the screenshots, right? So we're just there to kind of support them through that. Okay, so we talked about what a safety plan is. Now we're going to move into talking about like how do we screen for tech abuse, right? Rather than seeing like extreme forms everywhere. And so the point of this section is to really gather information so it can be fed into the safety plan. And some of these subjects we're going to talk about in greater detail during the third webinar. I'll be sure to tell you what those are. So I'm not going to go into great detail today, but I'm also going to provide you some sample questions to ask. And after the third webinar, you're going to get a sheet that provides you kind of a sample tech interview. So when in doubt, just have it in front of you, right? Check off some questions. It definitely makes it easier and less overwhelming as well. Okay, so what is tech screening? It is what it sounds like, right? We're basically asking questions with an eye on trying to identify the level of risk and what's actually going on, right? Like, how is this tech abuse happening? Full disclosure, it can be super laborious. It can take a lot of time. Tech probably takes like the most time collecting the evidence and doing the screening. But we work with young people, and so that's fabulous. They're growing up with technology, so at least they can lead us if we don't know what an app is. We're really just using our knowledge of dating abuse and of safety planning, and we're working with them as they know about tech and they know about their risks in their life. It's going to be strength-based, information-based, right? This is what I think is going on. This is what you can do. It's not going to be mandating that you do that, right? Giving them options and not creating fear, right? We're thinking positively about what is going on, that tech positivity, right? And we're being realistic. We're not going to tell them to go off the grid. We are going to be real that they are expected to use tech. Okay, so before we move into the screening questions, I want us to think for a second about how we share information. When we talked last time, we talked about how we share so much information. Basically, any information, our thoughts, our passions, our passwords, right? We share that all through tech. And so let's think now about how are we sharing that information. So again, we don't fall into the like, oh, it's got to be like some like ridiculous spyware that's able to see everything on my phone. It's probably not the case. It could be something super low tech. So we share information through passwords, right? So either no passwords on something, passwords that are easily hacked, passwords that are easily guessed. How many of us use passwords that mean something to us, right? That we may have shared, we would probably share that information during the course of a relationship. We share our passwords because we just do within the course of a relationship, or maybe it's mandated that we share our password. We also heard from a survivor last week say that their partner knew their password because they probably looked over their shoulder, right? So from no passwords or guessable passwords, that's one way. We share information through linked accounts. So what do I mean by that? So I mean, how many folks have signed into Instagram through Facebook, right? And you're like, of course I want to sign in through Facebook. I don't want to have to remember this password. And so access to someone's Facebook means access to someone's Instagram, right? It's that slippery slope. And so that's one way that we share information. When we're like, oh, how'd they get into Instagram? Probably because they knew about Facebook, right? And the password to that. We share information through linked devices. I don't know how many folks out there have I know I have an iWatch, I have an iPhone, I have a tablet, and I can get my text messages sent to all of them, right? And so you would just need to link my Apple account to your device to get my text messages, right? And so that's one way we share information. We share information through old-fashioned phone in the hand physical access, right? Especially if you know that password or there is no password, you can easily pick up that device and just go through their phone. We share information through reduced privacy settings. So privacy controls what others can see. So if you go on someone's Instagram, it's a matter of whether you can see who they follow, who follows them, what their real name is, right? Can you see their location? So it's what others can see about you. And then we share it through reduced security settings. So what someone can sign into. So if we have a super easy password or we don't have that two-step notification, then that might be a way that someone can gain that information. Or we have those security questions that are like actual things that happen in life, right? Like, what's your grandmother's maiden name, right? If your partner knows that, then they're likely able to at least have one of the security questions. We share information through data mining. I mean, the reality is when we're shopping online and it then pops up in your feed later on, that's data mining. There's a lot of money in it. When you register to vote or anything, information about us is being gathered and held on the internet. We share information through spoofing. So reminder, that's when you impersonate someone. And so the example I gave before where mom texted me and said to meet at the park, and then I did, right? I could have also told mom hey, and then after that, I'm going to go to school, right? So that's one way we share information, thinking it's to someone else. We share information through our social media accounts. And so some of us share our location, right? We check in at places. We might have it so you can see who my friends are. And so if my friends post a picture and where they're at and maybe say they're with me, then you're sharing information through that. We share information through our location settings. So I don't know if folks have ever gone to their location settings in their phone, but basically it tells us whether we want to share our location in certain apps always, when we use them, or never. And so we could be sharing a location without really thinking about it that way. It also controls whether the pictures on your phone come up with a location attached to them, right? If you have your location setting on, then when you look through your phone and look at your pictures, then you're probably seeing that not only is there a date, but there's a location attached to them. And that's because your location setting is on. We share information through third parties, right? I talked about that under social media accounts. So other people share information about us all the time. My information's on Day One's website. When I train across the state, they post stuff about me as well, right? So without thinking about it. We share information through public Wi-Fi without a VPN. So that's a virtual private network. And an example of that is when I was on my music account one day. I was suddenly in my roommate's music because we were on the same Wi-Fi. I didn't even do anything, but because we were on the same Wi-Fi, I was able to access information that was on his computer without even thinking about it. So that's one way we're sharing information. And for young people, they're often using public Wi-Fi because they don't want to use data or may not have data. So public Wi-Fi is definitely something to be thinking about. We share information when we click on those links, right? Maybe it's a really cute puppy picture or just a link and we're like, what is this? And that's how we get spyware, malware, and all that on our computers. We share information through duplicate accounts. So I've had clients where their partner puts their Instagram account on their phone as well. So they're able to go into the survivor's Instagram at any point. We share information through children in common. So oftentimes a child of a survivor or harm doer might have a tablet, might have a phone. And so if it's moving between households, the harm doer might be able to gain information through that device as well. And we share information through our search history, right? If I start typing in something that I've been to before, it's going to come up. It's going to auto-populate. And so we're sharing information that way as well. Now, that was probably overwhelming, right? So I'm sharing information, everything that I do, every step that I take. And so here are some ideas for how we control it. And then we're going to move into how do we screen? So how do we control what is shared? Well, we unlink accounts or devices. And again, these are things that we're offering to survivors as options, but not mandating. So this is an option, but we're not telling them they have to unlink, right? Unlinking an account that maybe the harm doer can access might escalate things, so we're always keeping escalation in mind. And so we can unlink accounts. We can make it so that we can't sign into Instagram through Facebook. We can make it so my tablet is not connected to my phone. It'd be kind of annoying, right? But if I'm worried about safety, that's one thing that we can be doing. You're able to actually go, if you have an iPhone, and check to see what devices are connected to your phone. And so that could be important to make sure that the harm doer's device is not connected to a phone. We can enhance our privacy and security settings, right? So especially when it comes to social media. We can talk to third parties about posting information and pictures. So sometimes it's going to require a hard conversation, maybe with an employer, maybe with a place that you're doing a presentation, to be like, I'm actually not comfortable with you posting my picture and my location and my name. Can you just post this, right? We control it when we change our location settings, right? So we make it so that our pictures don't have location attached to them. That's called a geotag. Or certain apps can't follow our location all the time. We can use incognito browsing. I'm going to show you a picture of that a little bit later, but that basically lets you search without seeing the history of that search. So if we know that that partner is using the same computer. We can use the VPN, right, that virtual private network, when we're on public Wi-Fi, so that we're protected, so that if the harm doer goes to the same school, is using the same Wi-Fi, they can't access what you're doing. We can plan for spoofing, right? We can inform folks about spoofing. Hey, this happens, or do you think it was them, or could it have been your partner calling or texting? And so planning so it's in our heads. So we're thinking about it when it does come up. We can have, fancy this, fake answers to security questions, right? So it doesn't have to be our actual grandma's maiden name. It can be our fake grandma that we use consistently in all of our security questions, right? We control what we share by Googling ourselves. I highly encourage you to Google yourself after this training. And see what is out there and see if you're cool with what's out there being there. You can actually get like Google or social media alerts for your name or picture. So if you're afraid of that popping up, you can set up those alerts. You can control it by questioning a follow or friend request, right? Like, who out there just like if someone requests to follow you, you're like, yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, it could be anyone, right? Spoofing, again, could be happening. We control it by asking that stuff be taken down. We're going to talk about how you do that. We're going to talk about, we're also going to apply all these rules to the child in commons phone, right? As a way that we're controlling information. We can block numbers, although I'm sure folks know you can just create and create and create new numbers, so that might not get you too far. And we can not pick up and not respond when unknown numbers do show up. So those are some ways that we can control what is shared. And so I think these 2 slides are a good way of kind of like just a synopsis of what to be thinking of when we're working with a survivor and trying to game plan how to control what they share. Now let's go through that sample tech screening. Again, we are trying to decrease risk and increase safety, and we're not having judgment in our questions as we're screening. So the first question is pretty straightforward, right? Like, what tech are you using? And a reminder from the first webinar, we think expansively when we think of this. So video games, behemoths like Google and Apple, blogs, school portals. So it's not just social media. So we're asking what tech is used. And then we're trying to find out what information does your partner already know or have, right? And so that gives us a sense of what additional information we don't want them to find out. It also makes us calm down in moments where we're like, oh my God, how did they know that? They must have like bugged my phone. What if they already had that, right? So what if they just had your password and that's how they knew that this person sent you a direct message? Or maybe they just, as we heard from the Youth Voices Network member, they know your routines. And so that's how they showed up there, right? They don't have a camera. So it helps kind of decrease some of the anxiety that can happen when we think through like what information do they already have, so that we can game plan around that. So if we're like, oh my gosh, they hacked my password or did some like master plan, it could be that they know your security question answers, right? Or it's linked to another account and they just knew that other account. So it can help kind of bring things down a notch. Then I'm going to ask if I can Google the young person before me. And it sounds super creep, but it's actually really helpful because then I'm going to sit with them. I'm going to be like, this is what I can see as someone who's not your friend on social media. Is this okay with you? Is this information that your partner already has? Do we need to remove anything? And be able to plan accordingly. Before we remove something, we want to take a screenshot, right? A reminder that once it's gone, it's gone. And so we're taking a screenshot of that personal information that we might find. We're going to think about spoofing accounts, right? So if like this fake Instagram account comes up as my client, we're going to work on taking that down. But first, we're going to screenshot. And how we take things down off the internet is actually usually not that hard. For the most part, I don't get a lot of pushback. If it's a Google hosted site, so an example of a Google hosted site is like YouTube, then you just have to request the removal through Google. If it's not a Google hosted site, so like when I've had clients' pictures posted on like blog sites or Pornhub, things like that, then you're gonna have to do 2 steps. So one is you're gonna have to reach out to that actual website and be like, hey, take this down. And you're going to have to reach out to Google and send them the URL so they can hide them until things are taken down. And usually you're going to have to Google kind of regularly if the partner has a pattern of posting information. I talked last time about the client whose partner posted like 15 a day for periods of time. So we were regularly Googling that client, but also my client set up an alert for her image and her name, so that she would get alerts when new things have been posted. This is just a sample email that we got back from Facebook when we tried to take down our client's fake Facebook account. This spoofing incident. And so just know that when it's a big tech company like Facebook, Instagram, they generally want to have some kind of ID. So plan for that. I certainly say advocate for being able to use a school ID or anything that has their picture and name. So pushing back is totally fine, but just know that they're generally wanting an ID before they're taking down a fake account. This is an example of requesting information taken down from WordPress. And so we basically just said it's posted without the permission or consent of our client. Survivors can send them messages too. It doesn't have to be a legal email. It can be, this picture is up here without my consent or knowledge, and I'm asking that, we're demanding that it be taken down. And then we also included that we wanted to flag our client's name for the future. And so that was able to be taken down. But remember, this is a non-Google hosted site, so we had to reach out to them, and then we had to reach out to Google, and we had to send them an URL to ask them to hide it. Okay. All right, so step 4 is we want to be reviewing privacy and security settings, right? And we don't have to be doing it for them. We just need to be talking about it, right? So like social media like Facebook lets you see how a particular person that you're friends with sees your account. So that the survivor could see how the harm doer actually can see their account if they're still friends with them. Also Googling, I'm able to see what me as a non-friend of them, if they unfriended them, can see. And so then we're going to figure out, do you want to reduce what they can see, right? It says where you go to school. Do they know where you go to school? No? Okay, then we have to increase your privacy settings. And security, of course, relates to password. And so we talked about having false information for security questions and for passwords, enhancing them, so having the 2-step and changing them if there's any fear that the partner has them. Know your policy regarding location stripping. So a lot of social media, especially the big name ones, will not carry your location if you post a picture on their social media platform. It will be stripped. However, it's important to know if that's the case. So if the survivor is posting pictures and it's not something like Instagram, Snapchat, or Facebook, then it's possible that they would be posting their location as well. And you also want to think about who else can see their profile. So I'm talking about family and friends of the harm doer and family and friends of the survivor. And so third parties are going to be important when you're thinking about, like, what can folks see? And so this is an example of how you would go through Google. They make it so not that easy. So if you're in your Gmail and you wanted to change your account settings, you go to the little tool thing in the right-hand corner, right over in the right-hand corner below the C that's in purple. And you would then go to Google account settings, which will take you to being able to see, you can do a security setup, checkup, and a privacy checkup to see what recommendations they might have for you. You can also see your activities, so you can see what you've done and see if it lines up. And it allows you to see what apps are connected to your account, and also what websites you've saved passwords for through Google. So again, that's the linking, right? So you just need to know Google passwords to be able to get into ADP, right? So that's not the safest thing. This is an example on Facebook of doing the privacy checkup. You go to the little lock in the right-hand corner, and then you can see on the next screen, you can change who can see your stuff, who can see your future posts, who can see things. Do you have to review posts and things that you're tagged in? So you can change your privacy settings in that way as well. And I'm just providing these as examples. They're going to be a little bit different on every platform, but I really think that if you know one, you can figure it out on the other. Sometimes it just takes a little extra time. You also want to be asking them about linked accounts, right? So what accounts are linked, what devices are linked as well. In addition to Instagram being connected to Facebook or iPad to an iPhone, you also should think about things like what goes to your email if someone knows your email password. So I had a client whose partner found them because their Uber receipts went to their Gmail, right? And so thinking about that, thinking about whether the partner also has their app on their phone. Again, that child in common device. And you also want to be thinking about the behemoth platforms. And I say behemoth because they just encompass so much. And so infiltrating one of them can mean like kind of a breach of so many things. So Apple and Google. And so you want to talk about what's linked to those. So Google, if you use Gmail, what's going to your email? Also, my Google is actually in some ways connected to my phone, which is Apple, right? So it could be linked in other ways, and I'm going to show you some screenshots to explain that. So this is my Google account, and it shows my phone. So it's connected to my phone. And I can find and lock my phone from my Google account, even though it's an Apple device. And I can call my phone through that. I can sign out through that. So just know that we are connected in a lot of ways that we might not even be considering. And so, be checking out your Google account to see if it's connected to your phone and to see if that partner would know information to get into that Google. This is an example of Instagram. See, it gives me the option to log in with Facebook, which is like, hello, easier. I don't want to remember passwords, but accessing my Facebook means accessing my Instagram. Okay, so the sixth thing we want to be asking is about current or prior physical access to devices. This really comes up because sometimes you can download apps that can kind of track where you're going. And so you want to be on the lookout for any apps that the survivor is not like, I didn't download this, right? And be thinking about any red flags that makes them think that their partner can hear what they're saying or where they're going. Worst case scenario is spyware. We'll talk about this during the third webinar. Do not jump to spyware. Young people rarely have spyware as the form of abuse on their cases because generally it costs an okay amount of money. What might be more common is that they might have something like Find My Friends or Like 360 on their phone. And their partner, if they just picked up their device, could have connected it to theirs and given permission for the partner to follow the survivor, right? So they're unknowingly sharing their location through these apps. So look for GPS apps like that. Look for unknown apps and think about changing settings or not allowing them to follow you if it's turned to follow. And so physical access to device matters also if you're using the same computer, right? So this is an example of that incognito mode that I talked about before. And so you usually go to the right-hand corner of the toolbar and you're able to set it. There's usually like a little ghost, and then it says you've gotten incognito, and it tells you what the capability, what it's going to prevent people from viewing, but what can still be viewed. And this is an example of location settings on my phone. So having physical access to my device, you could just go to my location settings and set certain apps to sharing my location at all times, right? So you would enter into location services at the top. Then it gives you a list of apps and when I share my location. And so a harm doer could just change mine to always sharing, right? If they want to be able to track through that. We're asking them now, thinking more about the abusive aspects of things. Are there any signs of stalking, any red flags of tech abuse? Reminder that it's usually low tech, right? And a reminder to keep a log so you can start to connect the dots, right? Rather than thinking it's spyware where someone can see everything on your device, it might just be spoofing, right? And I say just be, still very invasive, but it could be spoofing, and that's how you're sharing your location. It could be a GPS sharing app, and that's how you're sharing your location. It could be that they have your password for your email, and that's how you're sharing your location. The use of community Wi-Fi, right? They could have friended you and you thought it was someone else. And so you share where you are, who you're with on your social media. And so they're gathering it through that. And so you can look out to see if there were any alerts, like whether there's a new sign-in. I know I get emails from Google if there's a new sign-in to my account, and text messages since my phone number is attached to it. So you can see if it was a sign-in and you weren't there. You can also see if there were any changes to your account. So we heard last week that the harm doer had actually changed things in the survivor's Facebook account, right? Had read messages, had sent messages, had not accepted friend requests. This is just an example of a spoofing app. There's tons of spoofing apps out there. You can just look at the App Store and download it, and they kind of just say like, hey, this is fun, and you can mess with someone. We're asking them about threats. Did you ask them to stop and they didn't? Did they post anything? We're screenshotting it, right? We can also report it to a tech company if it's a threat. The ask to stop and didn't matters because sometimes crimes require that you ask them to stop and they didn't. And so it can be anywhere that this is happening, right? It can also be anonymous calls and texts. It does not have to be clear that it is the harm doer. It can be the anonymous calls and texts where it's like, who else would do this, right? It's either at the behest of the harm doer or the harm doer themselves. 9, we're asking about whether there's any concerns about non-consensual pornography or sextortion. We are not judging. We are not shaming. We are going to talk about this in great detail next time, so I'm not going to talk about it today. But just know that there are options, right? That reverse image search I mentioned before, flagging it, it can be removed. And we're going to talk about some of the wrinkles that come up around this, especially around young people, next time. And then 10, we're going to talk to them about like, how can we increase safety through tech? What are you already doing to increase your safety through tech? And like we heard from the YVM member, she was already kind of like looking for those text messages so she could know when she had to change her routine, when she could know that he was going to probably pop up. And so we're going to talk about this in great detail next time as well. But it should be part of your tech screening, right? So you're not just talking about the negative, you're also talking about the positive, trying to provide them that support. So that really encompasses the tech screening. We're going to move into hearing a little bit from a survivor about what they considered when they were thinking about whether to change how they use tech. And then we're going to wrap up. We are almost out of time.
Everyone would say like, well, why don't you just block him, or like, if you block him, he wouldn't call you and he wouldn't text you anymore. But I didn't block him for 2 reasons. One, I was scared that if I blocked him, it would make things worse, and then he would get like super mad to the point where like this time he will come at my door, and this time like he will grab me, or I don't know. I was just thinking like all these crazy things that could possibly happen that he would do because he was so mad that I did block him. And also because I felt like if I knew where he was at, or if he was messaging me and saying that he was in front of my house, then I knew not to leave. It made me safer. But if I blocked him and I had no idea about his whereabouts or what he was doing or anything, then it made it more scary for me. Like, what if I walk out and he's right there and I didn't even know, and maybe I could have known that if he was messaging me saying he was in front of my house. It took me a while to block him. And when I did block him, it was also because that's when I went to get an order of protection. Like, it got so bad. I just felt like I was never at peace. Like, I was always jumpy, I was always anxious, I was always looking around to see if he was here. He would always call me and text me, and like it was the worst feeling ever. Like, we're at a time where everyone's on their phones and like, looking at their phones, and for me to feel like I don't even want to be on my phone because if I'm on Instagram or something, I get a call from him or I get a message from him, and then my phone just starts blowing up and blowing up. Like, I didn't want to deal with that anymore, and it came to a point where it was too much.
Okay. So we heard from that same Youth Voices Network member, kind of her reasoning for how she decided to safety plan and what access she allowed the harm doer to have, and the reasoning behind that. And so she really pointed to 2 different reasons why she didn't block his number. And I can't tell you how often folks are just told, like, block them, as if that will remove the anxiety. but it doesn't, right? It's that unknown that can often increase that anxiety. And so really the two reasons were, one, that fear that with blocking, things would escalate and they would show up in person. I worked with a lot of clients where that was a huge concern, that, okay, it's happening through tech and it's terrible. But the minute that I block them, I have this feeling, right? They're just going to start popping up everywhere that they know I would be. So school and home, for this member. And then two, to be able to monitor, really to kind of see the moods, see the days that the harm doer was seemingly more obsessive, and hell bent on seeing them, and kind of trying to safety plan or navigate around that. And I have found that to be unfortunately really helpful. I know I had one client where their partner just always posted everything on social media, particularly Facebook. They would give updates as to whether they were going to court. They would post about their feelings pre-court, post-court, feelings about my client, feelings about me, right? So thinking about how they might threaten third parties or even service providers. And it was helpful because we're able to monitor that, right? So we're able to safety plan. Today, they seem to be incredibly angry. So thoughts about walking with someone, right? Taking an entirely different routine, or taking a car that day, not taking the subway. So we're able to plan around that. And so I think that what she says really displays how it can kind of take over, but also can provide you that safety, and kind of that feeling like at least you have some information, right? Some idea of what's going on. Okay, so we've talked a lot today about safety planning and tech screening. I would encourage you to, when you're tech screening, really use that information to feed into building that safety plan. It can feel overwhelming, but really your job is to help support them and provide them information, right? And to try to bring that down a few notches, and let them know what they're doing already, and doing that, helps to keep them safe. So that's part of that tech positive safety planning. We're screening for tech abuse whenever we're working with a young person. We know that there's dating abuse because, like I said, I've never worked with a young person and there wasn't tech abuse. We're keeping escalation in mind. That was really displayed by the Youth Voices Network member. That there's always that fear that cutting off, unfriending, unfollowing could lead to escalation. And so it's really going to be the survivor that knows that person best and is going to be able to plan accordingly. We're being realistic, right? We knew what it felt like to get that tech taken away from us. So expecting them to change their number or get off Instagram or not use email or not use text message, that's just not realistic. And so we're thinking about creative alternatives. Can you use a text app, so you can get text from friends, but that person, the harm doer, doesn't know that information, right? So we're thinking about creative solutions. And we are screenshotting, right? Once it's down, it's down. A lot of social media apps will let you download all your information. So you can do things like go to Facebook and download everything. So if there's lots of posts to the wall or direct messages, things like that. But it will not download things that were deleted, right? And I can't tell you how many times I've worked with folks and the harm doer posted something and then deleted it very soon thereafter, right? Because we're in an ongoing court case and they didn't want that to be used against them, right? And we're also thinking about tech abuse from the survivor's perspective. So I had one case where the harm doer posted a picture of my client with her child that was taken during a paternity proceeding. So not taken by the harm doer, not taken by my client, taken by a court personnel. And it was in the court paperwork, and that harm doer posted it online. And so to some, it might be like, well, what's the big deal? It's just your picture. You're not naked, it doesn't say anything else on it. But for her, it was kind of this continuing to control and to bother and menace her. And so even things like that can be taken down if you're creative and you're advocating and persuasive. Okay, so I don't see any questions. However, if you do have questions, next time we can always address them. Next steps, fill out the feedback form for all the webinars that you attended, register for the third webinar, and then we'll be having November webinars on domestic sex trafficking. So be on the lookout for that after next week's webinar. You'll get your CEUs after next week's webinar. You'll get the recording on Friday. And any questions, reach out to Noah. Their email is here. And if you're seeking services or support or materials, go to day1ny.org. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.